Welcome to the Recover Your Soul podcast, a spiritual path to a happy and healthy life. My name is Reverend Rachel Harrison. I started Recover Your Soul after having profound changes in my life from my recovery of alcoholism, codependency, and control addiction. I was guided to share the tools and principles of spirituality and soul recovery to help others transform their lives as mine was transformed. For us to overcome external circumstances, we need to turn the attention to ourselves, focusing on our inner change and healing. Positive results in our lives will follow. Welcome to Recover Your Soul. I'm Rev Rachel, and I'm super excited because I have another amazing guest to bring you to share her really compelling story. This is Lauren Sisler, who's sitting on Zoom across from me. Hi, Lauren.
Hello, it's so great to see your smiling face. So excited to be here.
I am so excited. Your book is coming out, Shatterproof. And so your publicist reached out to me and I read the beginning of your story and I said, absolutely, she has to come on. You are an ESPN sportscaster, which I think is fabulous to be a woman out there in the field that is not a lot of women.
Mm-hmm.
And you've really, really you've shattered a lot of the glass ceilings, but we were talking before we recorded, you have a lot of other situations that you've had to work through, people pleasing and addicted parents and life. So I don't even want to ask any questions. I would just love for you to jump in and let us know a little bit about your story. Addiction is a big piece of your story. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so we say ready, set, go. All right, we're going to jump right in. I love it. Yeah, it's been a long journey, right? And as I sit here right now, you mentioned the accolades, right? ESPN sports reporter on the sidelines, telling stories, doing all the things. But there was a point in my life where I was terrified to tell my story. I was terrified to tell my story because of the shame that I felt. And that all dates back to my parents' tragic deaths when I was a freshman at Rutgers. It was in March of 2003. And look, you back up into my childhood. We were a sports-oriented family. My brother was in 3 sports. I was a gymnast my whole life. My parents were so devoted and dedicated to everything that we did, our athletics, our academics, and just always saying, hey, you focus on your schoolwork, focus on your sports, and we'll take care of the rest. And I had a very loving and supportive family. I thought everything was going as scripted. I had wanted to earn a college scholarship in gymnastics, was so excited for this opportunity when I signed my letter of intent to compete at Rutgers in New Jersey. I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. So as you can imagine, rural Virginia. Grew up in Roanoke, moved out to the country when I was in high school. And then I go to Rutgers and it was like, whoa, culture shock, but in the best way, because honestly, it helped me to spread my wings and fly. I was 8 hours from home. Continued to talk to my parents every day. There was not a day that went by that I didn't talk to my parents, have that conversation, talk to them. My mom wanted a play-by-play of everything in gymnastics, and my dad was just a proud dad. And we talked on the phone this particular night. It was March 23rd of 2003. And I talked to both my parents. My dad had just celebrated his 52nd birthday, and I was telling him how I couldn't wait to celebrate when I got home from school that summer break. And we said our I love yous, we said goodbye, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And I set my alarm clock, talked to my roommate, went to bed, and I woke up to a phone call just after 3 a.m. And my dad told me that my mom died. And I just remember when I had the phone to my ear and I heard those words, I was just like, what? This makes no sense. Like, mom's 45 years old, seemingly healthy. It's the middle of the night. What happened, Dad? What happened? I can't explain it now. He said, get on the next plane you can, and I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And so as I'm frantically trying to figure out how I'm going to get home, I'm 18 years old, lost in the world, have no idea. I can't even afford a $250 plane ticket back home, calling the airlines, using my roommate's credit card to get the flight, get the airline ticket. Plane touches down, and I hadn't talked to my dad at this point. He was at the hospital taking care of things. He lived an hour away from the airport. He didn't have a cell phone, right? This is back when communication was a little bit more challenging. And my uncle and my cousin are the ones that pulled up to the airport that day. And initially I thought my dad's probably on his way down here, right? He's driving, like he's on his way. I'm going to see him. And we get in the car and we start driving. And finally I worked up the courage and asked my Uncle Mike, I said, Uncle Mike, I said, I want to see my dad. Where's my dad? And I can just still see as he's pulling over on the side of the road, He looks at my cousin in the passenger seat and then turns around and looks at me and says, Lauren, I'm sorry, but your dad's passed away too.
Wow.
Whew. And as you can imagine, as an 18-year-old coming home from Rutgers, coming home from New Jersey, to not only obviously losing my mom, but now within 5 hours losing my father, it was very tragic. And I think probably perhaps the hardest part of all is, I mentioned our relationship, but just this inability to understand why, right? Talk about the shame piece and starting to piece together. And it took years, mind you, to piece together ultimately what happened. But part of the reason it took me so long was because of the shame that I felt and really wanting to ignore the fact that both of my parents overdosed from prescription drugs.
Wow.
I didn't want to accept it, right? Like society tells you what addiction is, tells you what an addict is supposed to be, right? Puts all these labels. We label everything, right? We put labels on everything. I didn't want those labels, and I didn't want my parents to have that label. I ran from it. I ran from it for years because I couldn't possibly let people in on the secret that my parents were battling addiction for the last few years of their life.
You know what I think is what an incredibly tragic story. I mean, my heart is just breaking for you. And there is so much addiction that is behind the scenes. I mean, I was talking to somebody recently who was saying their their sister is an addict, but she's a functional addict.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she still has her job, but she still does her things. And I thought, you know, we think of addiction, and so many of us who are in this soul recovery community have people who in our lives who are really active out there. Everybody can see it, addicts. And then there's this addiction that is hidden and held in shame. And I know for me that alcoholism is so accepted. You know what I mean? Like you can be an alcoholic, just don't become a real alcoholic. You know what I mean? It was really even okay to be a pretty heavy drinker. And so these behind the scenes addictions are much more common than I think that we even can see, because from the outside you guys had the perfect family and
Yep.
you didn't even know.
Didn't even know. And here's the thing, I'll tell you this. So my dad was an alcoholic growing up, but as a 10-year-old, what is alcoholism, right? The only thing I knew was that, oh, dad drink too much. He goes on a weekend bender. He's stashing bottles up in the what do you
The
call
attic.
those? Not the attic, the what do you call the thing? The drop ceiling,
Oh,
right?
and the
The
drop
little
ceiling. Ooh,
drop ceiling,
okay.
right? Stashing bottles up there under the mattress, all the things. But to me, I didn't know what that meant. All I would hear is little conversations between him and my mom. Go back to your AA meetings. You've got to get this right. The ultimatums, I would hear those from time to time, but I didn't comprehend it. And then like I compartmentalized it, put it on a shelf. Oh, and dad's fine now for 6 months. He'd go about his business, go to work, functioning, and then he'd relapse and go on a little weekend bender. And it just was one of those things that was part of the cycle that I got used to, kind of part of the cycle, and just hoping that that cycle didn't break when it was a special occasion, Christmas, the birthdays, and inevitably it seemed to be around the holidays as we've talked about that that's a time that relapse is prominent, right? When celebrations are happening and there's a lot of factors and into the environment and the emotions and stuff, but I didn't understand addiction, right? I didn't know what that meant. And so when my parents were going to this pain management doctor, so my mom had degenerative disc disease. She had started going, she went to a neurosurgeon, she had neck fusions. And after she was released from, she had gotten two of those. And once she was released, the doctor, she was cleared. The secretary at that particular office literally said to my mom, hey, my husband has been going to this pain management doctor. It might be something you want to try out. And that was it. So she went to a pain management doctor. My dad also had chronic back pain and was in the military. I was actually born in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, so a little Navy brat over here. And he struggled with PTSD. And I think that was what I've been reading some medical records. That was a big part of like his struggles
Hmm.
and why he struggled with alcohol. And they started taking medications, Oxycontin. Eventually, my mom couldn't manage the Oxycontin. So she starts on fentanyl, the fentanyl patches. And oh, by the way, my dad's getting a 90-day supply of Oxycontin. She's taking Oxycontin and then eventually fentanyl. And then they're taking the suckers, the breakthrough fentanyl suckers, right, for breakthrough pain. And that just became the norm. But right, when like prescriptions, and you talked about that surface level thing where when you think you're by the book, like they're taking the medications, maybe they're a little reliant on it, but it's by the book. My dad's still working. My mom's working part-time. They're both functioning. We're going to church. We're living life. It can't be that bad, right? And I
Mhm.
think that's the problem, right? We're living this life. We're going home every day. We're functioning as a family, and what you would say is a well-functioning family. You would assume, although every family is dysfunctional, let's be real, but you see it, right? You see it for what it is. And I think the 15, 16, 17-year-old me, as this was really starting to ramp up, just stepped back and didn't ask questions because, oh, by the way, my parents weren't going to answer any questions. And I think that at that age, I didn't really see anything that was really out of the ordinary. Looking back now, I'm like, oh, that explains why my dad would fall asleep at the drop of a hat on the couch while we're watching a movie with the remote in the air. And it was then I'm starting to look back and see those things. But at the time, I didn't understand it. And I think my parents were really darn good at keeping everyone out, keeping
Mhm.
everybody out of what they were going through. And I think a big piece of that was the financial strain they were experiencing, and they would ask to borrow money, but really nobody was asking a lot of questions. And I think that's because they presented themselves in a way that seemed like nothing's really wrong. We're just a little bit of a financial crisis right now. We just need a little help, and then life would be fine for a while. And it's amazing because then when you look back, I think we oftentimes try to put things on a pedestal. And I'll be honest with you, and you bring up that point about how there's like the difference, and you're just a heavy drinker and you're still functioning versus not. And I will say when I started to accept the fact that my parents died of overdose, it was still very much my parents died of prescription drug overdoses,
Mm.
right? So I'm putting those things out there because I want people to know, oh, they were prescribed. But guess what? At the end of the day, what I wasn't being clear on is that my parents, literally both my mom and dad, put a fentanyl patch in the freezer, pulled it out, cut it open, sucked on it, and overdosed.
Wow.
So even though it was a prescription drug addiction, they were definitely not taking it as prescribed, right? And I think it is easy to put things on a pedestal and try to make that comparison. I'm functioning. I only have 5 drinks a night. That person over there is shooting up heroin. But at the end of the day, it's all the same. Everyone is connected to it in some way when you experience addiction, but also that shame piece of it. And I've realized that my parents are no different than the homeless man living under the bridge that has lost it all because of addiction. Because at some point, he was over his head. At some point, he was living a certain type of life, right? And it might not have been as boxed up and pretty as maybe my family presented it. But again, on the outside, things can look a lot prettier than they are on the inside, right?
Absolutely. And as a child, working through all that, I think the thing that's so profound is how addiction is a family disease, right? When we are in a situation where you see that the wheels are starting to fall off the bus, but you can't even ask about it, right? That is people pleaser setup extraordinaire. You start learning how to survive in that environment
Mm-hmm.
without even knowing that you're doing that,
That you're
right?
surviving in that. Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
you come out of that incredibly, incredibly tragic, super T trauma, high T trauma experience. And how do you feel in the world? How then do you navigate this awakening, this releasing of shame, this confronting adversity? How was that next step for you?
Yeah. And I want to preface this because look, when I'm asked this question, I'm basically giving you the very footnotes version, the very condensed version of the timeline, right? But the timeline is literally this long. Okay.
Right.
Just from the point of mom and dad die. I go back to Rutgers 2 weeks after I bury them. I'm in complete denial, literally in shock, right? Just going through the motions, barely making it in school, about to flunk out, about to lose my scholarship, all the things. Finally, after about a year of flailing around, my coaches and everyone gets through to me and says, look, like you got to stand up and take the first step. Like we're here to help, but you got to do something about this. And right. So I start taking baby steps and getting myself back. but I still wasn't acknowledging what happened to my parents.
Mm.
Like people would ask, oh, mom died of respiratory failure. Dad died of a heart attack. That sounds a lot better than overdose.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was manipulating the situation, and to the point where I started to believe it. Like in my head, I was making up this story of what happened to them. And so finally, after about 7 years where things started to turn, and again, it wasn't just immediate flip of the switch, right? This is building blocks along the way. But my auntie Linda, my mom's sister, who has been such a huge support, her and my uncle Mike, she really helped to break down the barriers I had built up. I'd built up this wall of just trying to protect myself and protect my family. And finally she got through to me. I'm talking, we would go fisticuffs. If she tried to bring up the truth and make a statement about my parents, not in a nasty way, in a loving way, but basically, here's the truth. Like they overdosed. Like I would just literally wanted to pop it right in the face. Like I was angry, like
Mm-hmm.
angry at her. And so obviously lots of anger, but I get to about that 7 year mark where finally I remember sitting at I was in West Virginia. I was early in my TV career, and my colleague at the station, Lauren, her name also was Lauren, had started talking to my auntie about my parents. And my auntie started sharing a little bit about what had happened. And it was like the first time that I didn't literally just come running in the room, like, yeah, no, we're not going to talk about it. Right. And finally, I just let her talk. So I just let her talk. So I was able to hear it for the first time. Right. And then after hearing it for the first time, step by step, it was like, okay, now I'm starting to accept.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then when I finally realized that, wait a sec, like, why hold on to this? Now that I'm accepting it, let's get it back out there. Let's put it back out into the world, and maybe I can make an impact. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that being a sports reporter, right? I'm a professional storyteller. It's what I do. I ask questions and I tell stories. I realized that like stories are an amazing way to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
Stories are what connects us. And I would see this impact that we would get, like when I would share a story and all of a sudden the ripple effect, people being impacted. Wow, this player overcame this. And what a great story. An amazing story. If he can do it, I can do it. And then that's when I started to really flip the script and say, you know what? I'm going to find my voice in all of this. And I will say, and I use this word exonerated because to me, you hear the word exonerated when you think about someone that's exonerated when they've maybe been imprisoned. For me, I was imprisoned inside my body.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say I was exonerated, it's like shackles of shame. And it's amazing how, like, all of a sudden I start sharing this and it's almost like I can't shut up about it, right? I'm here. And I was so fearful in the early stages, Rachel, that I was so fearful of the response. If people knew, what are they going to say? What are they going to think about my parents? And if anything, the response was resounding that, oh my gosh, your parents were amazing people. We love them so much. This is so tragic. And it maybe even a little peace came with it because people always wondered. But then, oh, I've got someone in my family. I've got someone that's dealing with this. Thank you for sharing your story. Because I think when we can step up and have the courage to share our story, we give others permission to do the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's so powerful because we can be shackled by somebody else's life. Ultimately, that's
Hmm.
the codependence, right? That we need them to be okay for us to be okay, or their story defines our story. And really, ultimately, addiction is pain.
Hmm.
Addicts are not bad people. They're people who are trying to cover what's happening for them through some behavior or some substance, and then it ends up overtaking you, and
Hmm.
they're trapped in it. So the more that we all release the shame and the guilt that is around it and talk more openly about it, it is this beautiful opportunity for us to have more open conversation. And I love your real honesty around how you protected yourself with denial while you
Hmm.
needed it. Ultimately, we have to be compassionate to ourselves too and say there's sometimes we just have to give ourselves time to be able to process. And then as your heart opens and as you have more awareness and more gentleness to yourself, then we can actually be more ready to hear what is.
Yes, I love that so much because that word ready, right? Because I think that we try to put a timeline on things. We try to have this blueprint for like how things are supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
And this person, you do the comparison game. This person did it this way. And you start comparing and you think, oh, it's been however many years. I should be over this by now, right? Like I should be well over this. But look, this is a lifelong process, just like substance use disorder, just like addiction. That it's a lifelong process, right? We're always growing, we're always learning, we're always transforming.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the beauty of life, right? And so like life never stands still. And I think for me, it's just that recognition of understanding some of the why and understanding it. And I got to tell you, in writing my book, everyone always said, "Oh, you should write a book." And I was like, "Okay, we'll see." And then it was like, I don't even know how to write a book. I'm not a novelist. I'm a conversationalist. I'm not a
Right.
novelist. But I finally at 19 years decided to start that process. And let me tell you, I've been sharing my story for quite a long time now. I would say the 10-year mark is really when I started to find my voice in it. And then slow but surely it's just blossomed. But 19 years later, I finally decided to write a book. And I did not know, I did not realize that I could have the level of healing that I have experienced in this process. Let me tell you, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Because let me tell here's the first and foremost. I wasn't in the house when my parents died, neither was my brother. So it was my mom and dad. So all we had to go off of was the account of when my mom called in, or I'm sorry, when my dad called in, he gives the account of how he found my mom, how she was on the porch. He had to tried to drag her into the bathroom to see if he could bring her back, and 3 paragraphs to tell a story of what happened that night. Like that's all we had. And then the other piece of that is that my dad passes away. He's on the phone actually with a medical service talking through some things, trying to get in touch with my brother to get him home from the military. And it's wild because he had to get my brother's social security number, went to go get it, and excused himself from the phone and collapsed. And the woman on the other end heard the heavy breathing, which he at that point had taken fentanyl as well and had overdosed. And so then the sheriff's department from our local sheriff's department, they were called in and they show up to the house, and I didn't know any of these things. But then wildly enough, I end up meeting the sheriff, the deputy that responded to the call that day. And he was able to fill in some of the gaps of what happened. And some of it was curiosity, and I didn't really want to relive this like horrible tragic tale. But I think also I wanted to know and understand just a little bit more about what could have led to this. And I think with his experiences, his name's Eric Twaits, and we become dear friends, him and his family, just precious. He explained to me as someone he was on the drug task force for many years after that. He was young in his career when this happened. And he said, I didn't know a whole lot when I didn't understand a whole lot when we walked in that house and we saw your dad laying on the floor. Like we just assumed it was suicide, right? That was the thought. Their deaths were ruled accidental, but he told me, knowing what I know now, knowing the the power of addiction, the power of drugs, your dad was doing everything he could to get you and your brother home, and he died with the phone in his hands that day. He said, I don't, that to me is not a man that was trying to leave this earth. That's a man that was struggling, that was obviously heartbroken, trying to survive and trying to get us home. And obviously he had taken the medication and tried to cope, right? Coping mechanism. And there was some closure that I got out of learning that information, some closure and some healing
Mm-hmm.
after I'd really pieced together what had happened that day, that early morning, March 24th of 2003.
We all have story. And one of the things that I think is so powerful about how this is a healing for you is it's not about trying to understand exactly why they did what they did or what their mindset is. It's more of you being present in your own experience and being able to see it and to have compassion and to have grace for everyone involved, but mostly for you
Mm,
to heal yourself.
yes.
And that self healing, I love what you said earlier about we're always growing and expanding until we take our last breath. We're here to be in earth school, I like to call it, learning about who we are. And if we don't look at our stories for how it is for us, we can stay trapped in that bondage.
Yeah.
And it's so wonderful. Kute Blackson is a spiritual teacher, and he had a podcast that said everyone should write a book because we all have these beautiful stories to tell and
Yes.
about resilience and growth and strength and pain. And the more we realize how interconnected we all are. But your story is inspiring to me, and
Mhm.
I love that that's this opportunity that we have together. So when you wrote the book and you started to have the healing, what is it providing for you like right now in your life that you wouldn't have expected?
Ah, I would say this, and this has become my mantra, right? So, really, why I started leaning into this book, my mantra has been fall in love with your story. And I think the biggest thing, right? So now that I have it on paper, I've shared the spoken word, I've shared it a million times, right? But when I was able to put pen to paper and to see it all mapped out, I think the number one thing, I think we protect ourselves. You talked about protection before, and I think the way our minds work, everything's been like segments, and then there's a black hole, and then segment, and then I remember this, but I don't know what happened here, and then I remember this, and it's a protective barrier, and it's also the way our mind works, especially in tragic and traumatic times.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to piece that together obviously is something I've experienced, but now I think what I love so much about it is I will go share and I get 30, 45 minutes. But then the thing is, there's so many lessons, so many things I've drawn from this process. And even sitting down, talking to my therapist, going through certain things, because now it's not, oh, I've got this issue. Let's talk through it. No, let's talk through this issue and understand why and how. I want to dig deep. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I actually get like joy in digging deep. And you talked about the people pleasing thing. Let me tell you, like, we're working big time on that right now. People pleasing is like my enemy. I want to make everybody happy. And she's, Lauren, you can't hold everybody else's emotions in your hands. Like, you just can't do it. And so it's been a learning experience there. But I will say, just even with writing the book, our stories are never complete. But I think now I've gotten to this place where number one, now I get to have this as a gift for other people, right? So this book to me feels like it's an opportunity to meet people where they're at. So whether it is addiction to drugs, to gambling, to pornography, there's 1,000 things that people
Mm-hmm.
could be addicted to. Or even if it's not addiction and it's a shame, right? An infidelity, a divorce, like something you've gone through, a job you've lost, a decision you've made that just didn't go the way you wanted. I want to meet people where they're at and just help them to move through that and to be willing to have the courage to I think a lot of times, and I talk about this with my therapist, shout out to Neely. A lot of times we love to just unpack our bags where we're at because sometimes it's easier just to, I'm gonna unpack my bags and this is where I'm living today. You know what? It takes courage, it takes work, it takes guts to put the stuff back in the suitcase and say, look, I'm going to pick this up and we're going to keep on moving. We're going to keep on
Mm-hmm.
driving down the road. It takes hard work and determination to work through those things. And a lot of times people would rather just hang where they're at. But no, we're not going to do that. I want to encourage people to pack those bags, throw in your best shoes and your party dress, and let's go. Because that's what life is all about. And there's the ebbs and flows. There's going to be good days and bad days. There's always going to be there's going to be happiness, but there's going to be tears. But I think when you have the tears and you have the traumas and you have the tragedies and you have the things that create disappointment and shame, it only strengthens us and helps us to have more gratitude for the things that are on the other side. And I think that's the name of the game. And I think that's all part of living this life and living this life with faith and confidence and just determination that we can't control everything, but we can control how we respond. So pack up them bags, ladies and gentlemen, and let's go.
And let's go. I love it. I love that. And so much strength in that, so much courage. And I think that we always have a choice to be moving forward or to be retreating. There's never really staying in one place. We're
Yeah.
always choosing love or fear, forward or back. And I also love the whole concept that you can unpack the bags. You don't have to put all that stuff back in there. You get to pick and choose what you're going to continue to carry with you. And that piece is so powerful, and to really honor how you got to where you are. So thank you so much for your wisdom today. I'm so excited for your book to come out, and thank you for sharing with the audience. How should people learn more about you or be able to access your offerings.
My life, right?
Yeah, your life.
That's my life. This is what I say. I love connecting with people. So my DMs are open. Hit me up on social media. I'm on all of them at Lauren Sisler. Come hang out. Come check things out. Follow me around. I'm a busy bee, but I would love to hear from you. So shoot me a message on social media. Would love to connect with you. Website as well, laurensisler.com. You can shoot me a note message there. And I do my best to get back and respond to you guys. And thank you. Thank you for the support. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for your sobriety and stepping up and saying, we are here, we're going to do this, and bringing people with you, because this is one of those things. That's what life is all about. We're not going to stay in this state of, let me just own it and be in it myself. Let's bring people along with us. And I just thank you for doing that and just your positivity along the way.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much. And you know what I think is so fun to meet and connect. And now when I watch sports and I see you, I'm going to be feeling like I'm watching a friend. So that's going to be exciting for me too.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Until next time, namaste.